This is a clip from our podcast that will be going out next week for the final round of the MotoGP World Championship. And I thought it was a good, interesting discussion that we had about Ducati's decision not to sign Jorge Martin for the future, and will they come to regret it. The full podcast will be out on Monday, so hope you enjoy it, and make sure to like and subscribe. And here's just a question. At the end of the year, we look back at obviously the big transfer market moves that we had. Do you ever think, Lewis, that there was ever a chance we could have kept Martin, Marquez, Bagnaia all in the same manufacturer? Do you think it was never really possible?
I think if Ducati hadn't have been as stubborn as it was in terms of who it was going to give, factory support to, and Marquez had gotten the factory bike at Gresini, I think possibly, I know there's contractual things in there that the contract dictated that Pramac would get the exclusive, but Ducati could have sweetened that deal quite substantially, I think, if they played the cards right. But yeah, Marc's power play was Marc's power play. He knew 100% what he was doing. I don't really fully. I think Gresini factory bike was the backup option if he didn't get what he wanted. But I have no doubts that he knew exactly what he was gunning for when he made those statements. At the Mugello weekend, that it's not going to Pramac. That's it. And I guess this was the fear. This was the thing Ducati was warned about when they finally kind of agreed to let him join the stable this year, was that he will disrupt things. And sure enough, he's taken 2 factory bikes off the grid. He's punted Jorge Martin to an Aprilia bike that is not going to be fighting for the championship next year. The rest of the Ducati stable is probably the weakest it's been for a long time.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of made his job easier if he's going to be gunning for the championship. That really, if you look at this year's form, in theory, then that's only one of the current Ducati stable who's going to be that step above the rest, along with him, which is his teammate. And we know that Marc is very adept at beating his teammates. So I think this was probably inevitable, but maybe a Ducati just been a bit, Ducati need to be a bit smarter when it comes to things, because it's not the first time we've seen them fumble big opportunities. We know the treatment of Casey Stoner, and they're looking at trying to bring Jorge Lorenzo over 2011, force him to walk away. They lost him from the test team again because they kind of didn't really give him what he was looking for. The clash of egos with Gigi and Dovi lost in that. There's Ducati been in this situation before where they've kind of not quite managed things very well, but ultimately, if Marc wins on the bike next year and dominates and is a champion, then everything's vindicated. So this conversation kind of becomes irrelevant if that's what then happens.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember us doing the podcast back in June. It was that weekend in Mugello really changed everything, didn't it? Because it was almost the shock of Ducati. I can't believe they were so shocked by Marquez's statements about he doesn't want to go to Pramac, and that almost then changed everything. Because as we know, on the Thursday, Jorge Martin was pretty confident. He was like, "Oh, they're going to make the right decision, and I'm pretty happy with it," sort of thing. And Marquez in that same press conference just was like, "Well, I'm not going to Pramac. I'll stay at Gresini. If there's no point in moving satellite teams to go to another one." Ducati just kind of have to think that there was a possibility, even I thought about it, maybe could have lost both Martin and Marquez if it had went so bad. But going into 25, we'll see what the test is obviously going to be like. They've probably made the right decision, but it could have been a bit worse if they had have just, not done the, how can I say, be a bit more reactionary than letting it play out the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the mysteries of the season, really, isn't it? Is why there wasn't that factory bike option for Marquez, because he did leave the door open on that, didn't he? I mean, Martin was always clear, wasn't he? If I don't get the factory seat, I've been overlooked once. If I don't get it this time, I'm going elsewhere. So we knew exactly where he stood on that. Ducati knew where he stood on that. But Marc was leaving this option open for Ducati.
Yeah.
He wasn't giving them that kind of ultimatum of, look, or at least not publicly, that if I don't get this seat, then I'm moving on. He said, I'll take the factory bike at Gresini. And as Lewis said, that option, though, never really came about. It was only ever factory bike at Pramac, and Marc immediately ruled that out. So yeah, it's one of the mysteries there, isn't it? And they put their eggs in the Marquez basket. And let's be honest, when Pecco was doing well mid-season and then Marc started winning races, it was all looking great. But now potentially we are looking at Martin leaving with the number 1 plate to Aprilia, and it's we were actually talking last week, weren't we? It's quite rare in the motorsport world to have a young champion who's sort of who leaves because the factory don't want him or their employer chooses to hire somebody else. It's pretty rare that situation occurs, and it's Aprilia's gain one way or the other. I mean, Martin's obviously, as we've seen this year, he's grown so much on the mental side, if nothing else. The speed is still there, but they're getting a great rider, but and potentially the reigning champion. So yeah, it's a big loss for them. But all credit to Ducati, as you guys raised earlier as well. They have been fair as far as giving Martin the machinery to fight for this championship. There were whispers, well, this is going to be difficult for him now that they know he's leaving. But Gigi has always said, look, this is a sporting competition. I'm not going to interfere. And I've certainly not heard any whispers that Martin hasn't got as much support as earlier in the year. We also know, don't we, from the Misano test, Pecco tried that chassis for 25, really liked it, was like, great guys, give it to me now. And they were, sorry Pecco, no updates for anybody this year. So they've kept they put sort of a lock on the updates, haven't they, to just leave the riders to fight it out. And here we are, unfortunately for Ducati, as in the factory team, they're in a difficult situation now because Martin obviously holds the upper hand. But in fairness to them, they have stuck to their word on that. So, but as I say, I think this is something that we talked about also in the future, looking back of, if Martin does win this championship, how did Ducati let him go?
Yeah, it'll be strange if you just read it on paper, wouldn't it? That sort of thing. But the story behind it's completely, there's so many different variables in there. And a good point Pete says, Lewis, about Martin's leaving, right, at the end. On Sunday, no matter what, he's gone to a different manufacturer, champion or not. How do you think he will be mentally this weekend in terms of thinking about how Ducati are just doing their job always as normal with them? It'll be strange for him because it's like he's all he's ever really knew about a GP, and he's having the biggest moment of his life potentially, and then it's all new again. It's not continuing the story. It's a very rare story at MotoGP, one that I really can't think of, to be honest, for anyone else.
No, I'm struggling to think off the top of my head for a similar kind of scenario, really. I mean, the fear is that perhaps adds a bit more pressure onto Martin's plate because he must be looking at the Aprilia's performance right now and must be looking at the fact, they've lost Albessiano, they're losing Aleix, as in any capacity, and that is we're yet to it's going to take a year or so really before we see what Sterlachini's influence is going to be in that project. This isn't a weaker Aprilia project than it was, at the start of the year, really. So you do wonder, as in the back of his mind, is he looking at this as, well, this is going to be my last chance until probably the rule cycle changes again. That there is that dynamic that he will have to shut out, and Pramac are going to have to really sit down with him and go, look, you need to block all of that out, focus session by session, lap by lap. This team is behind you. Ducati's behind you. Do not focus beyond Sunday. Yeah. We know he's been working with a sports psychologist this year. Gino Borsoi says he's been working with a sports psychologist as well. So clearly this team has been working on a lot of outside elements from the track to try and just strengthen things. And I think, that's shown in the consistency we've seen from team and rider in the second half of the championship. But I would be surprised if he doesn't win this championship and then isn't feeling just a little bit kind of sad at the situation. Because, I remember last year we, got to championship decider day and we knew that had he won the championship, he was going to be going to the factory Ducati team. And I asked him the question at the time. I said, look, we know you were going to be stepping up. What more can you do? And he was like, look, if I haven't done enough to prove my case already, then it's never going to happen. And that comment is now very it's very prophetic because it hasn't happened, and that would rankle him a bit, I think, as well. If you're a world champion and you were told you're getting the bike, then you're not getting the bike, you will still look at that and doubt yourself a bit and go, how can I possibly be in this situation? So I'll be very interested to see if he does win the championship this weekend, what the body language is like, and I will definitely try and ask a few pointed questions in that sort of direction to see what the feeling's like.
Yeah, even thinking back to that, I think he said during, I think it was this season at some point, yeah, the leathers were waiting in the back of my motorhome. He had the Ducati leathers waiting, well, the test leathers. Like that, just think of how close he could have got to a seat last year if he had won the title, and the way it's all just changed. It's a really interesting story, and it's something I think that I don't think it'll ever happen again, really, to be honest. It's so strange, isn't it, Pete?
It is, and the only thing I would also say is, you know what? I wouldn't be shocked if in a few years' time there's a phone call coming back to Martin from Bologna, just inquiring about his contract situation for the future. I mean, he's still young enough. That's what we can say. Who knows? In a couple of years' time, as you say, when the rules change, Ducati are not going to forget this year that Martin's done. Whatever happens this weekend, he's shown that he's a real class rider, and at such a young age. Let's see where he goes, from here. But certainly, I think that is the other angle on this. Is it might not all be over there. There is still time in his career anyway for at least a few more contracts and therefore a few more bike changes. Yeah.